Welcome to Clued in Mystery. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brooke, and we both love mystery.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Sarah. It's so great to be recording with you again today.
Yes, I'm looking forward to our conversation about mystery structure.
Absolutely. So, as mystery readers, we love following clues, weighing suspects, and trying to stay one step ahead of the sleuth, whether they're an amateur or a seasoned detective. We await that moment when everything comes together in a way that feels both surprising and inevitable. But that sense of satisfaction doesn't happen by accident. Authors rely on a tried and true structure to make these stories work. Now, every genre has a structure, whether it's romance, horror, action adventure. But mystery, maybe more than others, depends on an underlying framework. And when a story is working well, the framework stays invisible. We aren't even consciously thinking about the structure, or what sometimes is negatively called the mystery formula. Even so, when a story doesn't follow the structure or breaks from it in an unexpected way, it really stands out to us. And sometimes that leads to something fresh and memorable, but other times it leaves us feeling unsatisfied or even kind of put off. And Sarah, I think you and I really started thinking about the idea of structure when we covered inverted mysteries. Because in that episode, we talked about a style of story that reveals the culprit right from the beginning and then shifts the story to whether that villain can elude capture by the detective or a sleuth. And it really inspired us to think more about the way mysteries are told. So, today we're going to take a closer look at the idea of story structure in mysteries, and maybe talk about the things that we think are okay to bend or what we just think you can't change in order to keep it a satisfying story. So, really briefly, because we're going to probably define story beats and talk about these much more deeply, but if you're not an author and you're not thinking about a story in this way, I'll just kind of outline that what we're referring to as these beats are: a crime is committed, an investigation takes place, the sleuth has a misstep or a few missteps, then there's some sort of realization that flips everything on its head, and finally this resolution and a feeling of justice. And as I said, there's a lot more to each of those steps and room to play, but that's going to be the fun part of you and me, Sarah, breaking down and talking about where the adjustments can and can't be made. So I thought a great place to start would be with that notion that we hear often, which is like mysteries are just formulaic and they just always follow the same pattern, and so it's seen as a criticism. Um, and let's kind of break that down a little bit.
Well, I think that's a great question to start with, Brooke, because, we've talked before about like what is the appeal of mystery, and it's that resolution at the end, right? And that appeal, it, you get to that resolution because you hit all of those steps that you talked about, right? And so if you didn't get there, if as a reader or a viewer, you're not kind of led down this path, it's not going to be a satisfying resolution. And I think that's kind of what we were talking about in the inverted mystery How Catch 'em episode, where, I think we talked about a couple of things. Those are kind of hard to come by because they're hard to write, I think. Um, and sometimes they're just not as satisfying, right?
Hmm.
Because you're not taken on that journey.
Exactly. Right. Well, and I think it's a little unfair when I hear that. Of course, we're biased because this is our favorite type of story. But as I said in the intro, every single type of genre fiction follows some sort of, whether you want to call it a pattern or a formula. Uh, there's a very definite formula to romance. fiction, for instance, or action adventure, horror movies. So to just call out mystery, I think, is a little unfair because every genre has that, and they're all kind of based on that um, hero's journey. They're
Mhm.
tweaked and kind of massaged because of what the genre expectation is, but this is a way that stories have been told for centuries, because it's exactly what you said. It feels very satisfying to us as kind of as humans to go through that journey with the main character.
You think about television series, for example, Murder, She Wrote. Um, And there's a definite structure to those stories. Like you said, the crime occurs, the investigation begins, you're introduced to the various suspects, and
Hmm.
each of them has a potential motive. Um, and then Jessica Fletcher weeds out which one it is. And in some series, it's more pronounced where so the sleuth interviews the various suspects and is heading down one path and then takes a hard turn because it actually ends up being the least expected of the suspects. And you can take almost any kind of certainly cozy series would
Hmm.
follow that kind of path, right? And I think as viewers or readers, we know that that's what we expect, that's what we want.
Exactly, exactly. There is a comfort in knowing what to expect, and knowing that at the end, justice will prevail and good will prevail. And yeah, I think it's a comfort, not a limitation.
I like that way of thinking about it, Brooke.
There's also this need for, you said, if the beats or stages of the story aren't followed, it's not as satisfying. So I was thinking of this as it's sort of like a roller coaster, where tension, tension, tension builds, and then you have kind of a release, and then once again you climb, and there's release. And a roller coaster that just went flat is not going to be very much fun. Plus, you can't do either one forever. You can't just like build tension to infinity, or have thrills. I've read those stories where it's just like one action moment after another, and that would be an example of a roller coaster that just constantly goes down, right? But
Yeah.
what we crave and what we enjoy in a story is kind of that ebb and that flow. And if you follow the story structure, that's exactly what is built into it.
Well, and I think that structure is necessary to make sense of the story, right? It would be a very short story if it was uh there was a crime committed, the detective walks in the room and says it was you, right?
Yes.
Like
It's no fun.
you need that process of, who could it be? And maybe this is where the criticism for something like a cozy is that it can feel a little too formulaic, right? You've got the angry neighbor, you've got the long lost relative, you've got the
Estranged spouse.
estranged spouse, all of whom could have been the villain. If there's not enough variation in the types of characters, that's when I think a series doesn't
Mm.
work particularly well, right? But if you've got all of these different, you know, settings, if you've got all of these different kinds of suspects, then that I think makes that formula work.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, and I think that some of those puzzle pieces can get moved around. I mentioned that, there's usually some missteps, and another way to think about that is the red herrings, because the sleuth follows the wrong path for a while. And it doesn't just have to be interview, 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 red herring, you can move those puzzle pieces around, especially in the middle of the story, and keep that interest, as you said, so that it's not just a cookie cutter way of telling the mystery story. And I think that that works better for me because I will accept that if an author tells the story in the exact same manner, maybe there are different characters, but then that can get a little tedious. It's like, oh, this is exactly how she put together her last mystery. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's not very much fun.
Yeah, if there's always 3 suspects,
Mm-hmm.
one is from work, one is from the friend relationship, and one is from the family relationship, then, yeah, that does get a little bit tiresome.
Yeah, and I've seen advice where make them all lie the first time, and then you go back and you interview them again, and then the second time, and it's like, okay, you can do that once in a while, but if every single one of your stories does that, then it kind of takes the fun out of it.
Brooke, do you think that that structure that you were talking about at the beginning, the different beats, is that the same whether we're talking about a cozy with an amateur sleuth, something that is maybe a little grittier with a police detective, a procedural, and a domestic thriller, for example? Do you think that those are the same?
I think that broadly they are the same, but the situation changes a little bit in a thriller because all of those things still happen. But I feel like we, as the readers or the viewers, kind of become the one experiencing it. We see that there's been a crime. We start to put things together in the story. Mentally, we take some wrong turns, right? We start thinking, oh, it's the husband or whatever, right? As we're experiencing the story, and then things start to clear up for us because a new piece of evidence is presented in the story, and then in the end, we have our own sense of resolution. Uh, Most of the time, there isn't a sleuth in those stories, but we become the stand-in sleuth, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're along with that main character doing that investigation. What about when stories are told from multiple points of view?
Hmm. Yeah, it gets tricky, doesn't it? Again, I think it creates that experience for us as a reader or a viewer. But see, that's where I feel like it's hard to say that mysteries are always the same because that's an example of a way an author took the framework and then played with it enough that we still get the same sense of satisfaction, but it's most definitely not a cookie cutter story because they've introduced some other points of view or maybe a second timeline. And those are some really fantastic ways to play with the structure.
Mhm, mhm. Uh, and then, I guess another way to play with the structure is, like you mentioned, a dual timeline, right? So you've got whatever's happening in present day, and then you get fed information about something that happened in the past and see how that influences what's happening now. Um, so that way, or where there are, two parallel stories that at some point converge,
Yeah.
taking place years or decades apart from each other.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think about your series, Sarah, and that's what's happening. And I think one great thing that stories like that do is drive the at least me, it drives me to keep reading because you're finding out what's happening in one timeline, but then you're really anxious to get back uh, to the other time. In your book, in particular, it's a time period, so it's a very good driver for a reader, I think. But then again, that convergence at the end, not only are you getting the solution to the crime, but you're also seeing how everything fit in with these two different timelines. And when that's done really well, it's like doubly satisfying then.
So I can think of examples where that maybe doesn't work, right? Either for too long as a reader, you're questioning, why are we reading about what happened 25 years ago? What does none of these characters are the same? This has nothing to do with the main story. And then it's only kind of pulled together at the last minute. That is not particularly satisfying.
No, that is a great demonstration of what I think is my biggest pet peeve. Maybe the thing in mystery structure that I can't deal with is timing. Like, I think you can break a lot of rules for me to still enjoy the story. Like, I think I enjoy How Catch'em's much more than you, but the timing just really bothers me. One recent example is a new show. It's a limited series on Netflix, His and Hers, and it's a small town murder mystery. Um, and I was quite engaged throughout, but the ending didn't land for me. We're given what's feels like the full resolution. So you've made it through the entire process. You've had the inevitable surprise. And then the epilogue reopens with this major twist. And I think once you put the bow on it with the resolution, you can't then reopen it. And that just really did not sit with me. I think the twist was good. I just think that the timing of it was all wrong so that you could have still made the storyline work. I don't know if I'm describing that well enough, but timing is so important.
Yeah, so I haven't seen it. And if I remember, is it based on a book by Alice Feeney?
Yes,
Yeah. So, and I haven't read the book, so I don't know where that twist happens in the book. And it would be really interesting to see if they've made an adjustment for the screen adaptation than from what she originally intended. But yeah, that's a great example. I think another example of where the timing is really important is if the bad guy is introduced at the very end.
absolutely.
If you've seen the sleuth rule out all of these potential suspects, and then it turns out to be a character that is only introduced at the very end, right? Like that doesn't really work either.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we are kind of skirting around talking about some of the rules of mystery, which I think we'll do in another episode. But it all goes together, right? The way that you introduce the mystery, the way you introduce the suspects, the way you reach the resolution. Um, there is a sequence that needs to happen for that to work.
Yeah, great point. The rules of mystery, which I can't wait to talk with you about, Sarah, and traditional story structure that we're talking about today have to go hand in hand. And that's, I think, what makes just the most satisfying mystery stories.
Well, Brooke, thank you. I think this is such an interesting conversation to just talk about structure a little bit more deeply.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. This was great. And listeners, we do have a question of the week for you. What's a story you've read or watched that didn't work for you because it strayed too much from the traditional mystery structure? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send us an email or come find us on Instagram and Facebook. But until next time, thank you for joining us on Clued in Mystery. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Sarah, and we both love mystery. Clued in Mystery is written and produced by Brooke Peterson and Sarah M. Stephen. Music is by Shane Ivers. If you liked what you heard, please consider telling a friend, leaving a review, or subscribing with your favorite podcast listening app. Visit our website to sign up for our newsletter, The Clued In Chronicle, and get mystery news, podcast updates, and bonus episodes. We're on social media at Clued In Mystery.